Conflict in Communication. Week 5, Listening. Listening Responses. This video provides an overview of different strategies that you can employ in conflict situations. By the end of this video, you should be able to define and identify various conflict communication styles, define and identify the various components of an assertive message, describe the listening process, and define and identify various listening and non-listening responses. Review. So here's our model of conflict. And again, we're focusing right here on behaviors, although we're remembering that behaviors intersect with attitudes and core issues. And here's the transactional model of interpersonal communication, which is a model we're focusing on in this course. Again, this model suggests that interpersonal communication is a fluid, messy, dynamic transactional process that, in reality, operates more like dancing. Playing with this dancing metaphor, over the next few classes, we're going to be learning some dance steps that can offer strategies for communicating in conflict situations. The first set of steps include assertive messaging, which is a highly structured way of coding a message that you want to deliver to another party, various listening responses, and a few strategies for dealing with criticism or other forms of defensive behavior. In this video, I'm just going to talk about assertive messaging, which is related to another approach called nonviolent communication, and various listening responses. Conflict communication styles. Before I talk about any specific communication, quote-unquote, dance steps, I want to provide an overview of a few general approaches to communicating in conflict situations. This draws upon the work of Phelps and Austin, who suggested that everyone has a dominant conflict communication style. That is kind of a fallback approach that you are most likely to use in conflict situations, particularly if you are in a high-stress situation. The typology developed by Phelps and Austin includes the categories highlighted here in red. However, there are additional styles kind of in between the ones that they originally specified. These are the ones in black. They suggest that these styles have two dimensions. On one hand, they differ in terms of how directly and explicitly an individual communicates about the conflict situation. The other dimension relates to the extent to which the person wants to show concern or care for their relationship with the person with whom they are in conflict with. We can start on the left with approaches that show minimal regard for relationships and/or other parties. The most direct of these styles is direct aggression. This is overt, explicit, and direct behaviors which actively cause harm to the other party. Yelling and berating someone, or even using physical violence, are examples of communicative acts that fall under this category. A less direct approach is passive aggression. This can take three forms. On one hand, you can say something directly to the other party that seeks to harm or punish them, but in kind of a disguised manner. If you've ever had someone say something like, "Fine, I'll do it myself," that could be a form of passive aggression. So you want them to know that you are upset, and you are looking to upset or harm them, but you don't want to do it in a really obvious manner. Another form of passive aggression is the use of malicious rumors to indirectly punish or harm another person. And lastly, you can give someone the silent treatment, meaning you avoid someone or avoid talking with someone, but you do it in a way where you want the person to know that you are avoiding them, and you want them to know that it is in fact a form of punishment. Moving to the middle, there are a variety of indirect conflict communication approaches that show more concern for relationships and other parties. The first indirect approach would be formal or informal mediation. In this case, you are directly addressing the conflict, but you are doing so with the assistance of an outside party that can help to structure and control the communication. This can include very formal and structured mediation processes, like legal mediation, or more informal discussions that incorporate the assistance of an outside party. Hinting is another indirect approach. In this case, you don't specifically talk about the conflict or issue, but hint that there is something going on that is bothering you. Of course, this depends upon the other party being able to correctly interpret your hints. Venting is also a form of indirect communication. In this case, you are not communicating with the other party directly at all, but are telling someone else. In some cases, you might tell someone that can actually do something about the situation. Say, for example, you have a conflict with a coworker, and so you go to your supervisor and ask them to address the issue. Or you can be even more indirect with your venting. Maybe you just need to talk about the issue to kind of get it off your mind or off your chest. So let's say rather than talking to your supervisor, you vent to another colleague. Moving to the right, we find approaches that are based upon high levels of concern for relationships and other people. This includes assertive approaches, which can be broken down into two kinds. The first is very formal, highly structured forms of assertive messaging. This includes almost following a formula for composing messages in conflict situations. This can be really useful when dealing with very challenging conflict situations. However, in daily life, formal assertive messaging isn't particularly practical. But there are ways that we can incorporate aspects of assertive messaging into our regular communication. This would be a more casual, informal, or mixed approach to assertiveness. Moving down, we come to non assertive approaches, wherein we really do not address the conflict with the other party because we do not want to destabilize our relationship. This includes accommodating the other party, just giving in to their side. It also includes avoidance of the conflict. You don't let on that there is an issue because you don't want to, again, destabilize the relationship or risk hurting the other person. Now, for the sake of this upcoming quiz, all I want you to be able to do is to identify if a communication style would be classified as directly aggressive, passive aggressive, indirect, assertive, or non assertive. Pause the video. What conflict communication style do you most commonly use? Composing assertive messages. So, as I mentioned, assertive messaging is a highly structured, almost formulaic way of composing messages. I'm suggesting it here as one set of communication dance steps that we can use in conflict situations. Another similar approach to communicating in conflict situations is nonviolent communication, which was conceptualized by Marshall Rosenberg and draws upon his background as a clinical psychologist. What I'm going to outline here draws upon both Rosenberg's work and more commonly found descriptions of assertive messaging. Overall, assertive messaging includes five components: an internal reflection on your own judgments and biases, a statement of observation, a statement about your emotions, a statement about your needs, and a request or intention statement. The first step in composing an assertive message is an internal reflection on your own judgments and biases. This includes internal thoughts such as, they should have done this or not done this, or they are lazy or mean, etc. The point of this step is to acknowledge our biases and judgments, and then to prevent having these be reflected in the assertive message statement that we are going to deliver. Then we go on to actually developing the statement that we are going to say to the other party with whom we are in conflict. We start off with an observation, or what I've been calling a behavioral description. This is the same type of observational statement that I've been asking you to develop when writing your peer evaluation forms. The observation statement should be what anyone else would see if they were in that situation, or say what a video camera would capture. It's commonly formulated as, when I see, hear, or think about, and then you offer a description that is as objective as possible. In some forms of assertive messaging, this is followed by two or more interpretations of the behavior. So it'd be something like, when I saw you close the door quickly and loudly, I wondered if you were in a hurry or if you may be feeling angry. However, there is danger in offering an interpretation. You might get it wrong, and your misinterpretation might make the other party defensive. Nonviolent communication does not include interpretation as part of its formula. The next step is to identify the specific emotions that are being triggered by the party's behavior. Here again, the point is to be as specific as possible. Saying that it makes you feel bad doesn't really help. Are you frustrated, aggravated, angry, sad, lonely? It's important to expand our emotional vocabulary. The next step is to identify the source of your emotions, specifically the need that you have that is either being unmet or being impaired due to the actions of the other party. So the statement would now be phrased something like this: when I see X, I feel because I have a need for. This part could also make reference to the perceived needs of the other party, as perhaps you want to identify something that is negatively impacting them. In some assertive messaging formulas, this stage is called consequences. The assertive messaging statement generally ends with a request or intention statement. This could be something that you would like the other party to do, specifically some form of behavior you would like them to change. Or it could be a statement indicating something that you plan on doing, either to improve the situation or what you might do if the situation doesn't change. So now we have something like, when I see, I feel, because I have a need for, so could you, and then you state your request. So those are the components of a full assertive messaging statement. You can also use this formula as a template for listening effectively to others. It can help you identify what, specifically, is bothering the other party, as well as how they feel, what they need, and what they want to do or what they want you to do. So you basically run through the same formula, but in a way that paraphrases the other party's perspectives. So it's now when you see, hear, or think about, do you feel, because you need, so in the future, can I or can you? Pause the video. Think of an interpersonal conflict that you have either recently experienced or are currently experiencing. Try to compose an assertive message that you could deliver to address this conflict. The listening process. The textbook does a nice job of outlining the main stages of the listening process. Central to this is understanding that hearing is just an initial step that involves the taking in of auditory stimuli. Listening itself is actually a psychological process whereby we interpret and make sense of the stimuli that we receive. Within interpersonal communication, listening is therefore a collaborative process of meaning making. The process has four main steps. The first is selecting, wherein we filter out certain stimuli and only focus on that which is relevant. This is heavily shaped by our motivation, or the underlying reason we have for listening. Then we need to decode and understand the stimuli that we have selected. Our capacity to do this is shaped by various factors, including our understanding of the context, our prior knowledge, including that of language itself, and our capacity for cognitive complexity. The nature of our relationship with the other party is also a factor, as is the extent to which our fields of experience overlap. Our brains can't hold on to all the stimuli we receive or all the messages that we understand, so we only remember portions of it. Generally, we don't remember too many specifics, but hold on to what is called the residual message, or the underlying meaning or basic gist of the message that was received. Lastly, listening includes responding to the other party, providing them with observable feedback that indicates our understanding. There are several factors which impede the listening process, which generally fall under the concept of noise, which we talked about last week. These include external noise, physiological differences like hearing loss, auditory fatigue, which is what occurs when you've been in a loud environment for an extended period of time, information overload, wherein you're trying to process too much stimuli at once, rapid thought, or what the textbook identifies as the speech thought differential. This basically recognizes that our brains process information much faster than someone else can talk, so our busy brains don't stay focused on the other person and start to fill in information or make judgments or just wander off and start to daydream. Psychological noise, like things that are on our minds, as well as our own personal concerns and perspectives. And lastly, our tendency towards confirmation bias. This is the tendency for us to select and understand only that information that corresponds to our previously held beliefs and perceptions. Listening responses. I have this section labeled as not in the course textbook, but that's not totally true. On pages 143 to 145, the textbook does outline some ways of responding, but suggests that certain forms of response are inappropriate, such as giving advice. I want to challenge this by suggesting that listening responses actually sit on a continuum, and that our choice of response depends upon the situation and what response the other party may be looking for. These different listening responses can be classified according to the extent to which they seek to reflect or influence the other party. More reflective listening responses basically has the listener serving as a mirror for the speaker. Less reflective and more directive responses seek to influence the speaker's future behavior. Silent listening is the most reflective listening response. With silent listening, you don't say anything, but remain attentive to the speaker and use nonverbal responses to indicate that you are paying attention. With a questioning response, You ask the speaker for additional information through the use of either open or closed questions. Open questions open up the possibility for multiple kinds of responses. Closed questions limit the number of responses that are possible, like a simple yes or no question. You can ask questions to help ensure that you have correctly interpreted the speaker's meaning. You can also use questions to identify the speaker's underlying emotions and perceptions, to encourage them to disclose more information, to help them think deeply about themselves and to promote self discovery, and to clarify facts. However, we do need to be careful with how we use questions and to avoid what are called counterfeit questions. These are really non questions that seek to trap a speaker in some way. Often these are actually statements that are disguised to sound like questions. So something like, "You didn't like that movie, did you?" That's actually a statement. Or, "Why are you so angry?" That's not really a question. It's a statement implying that the other party is angry. Moving on. With the paraphrasing response, the listener uses their own words to restate the message they thought the speaker was sending. Paraphrasing isn't parroting back a statement word for word, but is rather an attempt to articulate the underlying meaning. This can involve paraphrasing for facts and or personal paraphrasing for emotions and thoughts. With the latter category, personal paraphrasing, you may be paraphrasing things that the speaker is implying more so than what they are actually saying directly. Empathizing goes beyond just reflecting the messages being sent to demonstrating that you actively identify with the speaker. This includes both perspective taking, that is, coming to see the situation from the speaker's perspective, and emotional contagion. This means that you actually emotionally feel what the speaker is feeling, regardless of whether the emotions are joyful or painful. This also means that you avoid dismissing the speaker's perspective by avoiding statements that diminish their experience or redirect the flow of conversation back to you. Supporting responses go beyond identifying with the speaker to actively supporting them, that is, showing solidarity and agreeing with them. This can be through overt agreement, an offer to help, praise, or reassurance. An analyzing response offers an interpretation of what the speaker has been saying or describing. This interpretation is from the listener's perspective, so we need to be careful when offering an analysis. We can't jump into this too quickly because we need to really listen to the speaker so as to gather enough information to offer a plausible interpretation. Hence, it is generally a good idea to offer an analysis tentatively, to be willing to change our interpretation if the speaker disagrees. We should also label our analysis as our analysis through the use of words like I think or I wonder if. An evaluating response generally includes an analysis, but goes a step beyond that to offer some kind of judgment on the thoughts or actions discussed by the speaker. So, an analysis could be something like, I think what's really bothering you is, and then an evaluation would be, and that's not a helpful way of looking at things. So, again, it includes an analysis, but then goes on to evaluate, to judge what's been discussed. Of course, when we evaluate, we need to consider firstly if the speaker wants an evaluation from us, and secondly, if we are actually qualified, for whatever reason, to pass that judgment. Lastly, an advising response offers your opinion on what you think the speaker should do, what actions they should take, or how they should be looking at an issue. Again, as with the other more directive responses of analyzing and evaluating, you should only offer advice if the speaker wants advice and if they see you as sufficiently qualified to offer it. So now we have 8 possible listening responses, all of which have their place within interpersonal communication. Generally, when listening, it is good practice to start at the reflective end, with silent listening, questioning, and paraphrasing, before moving towards the more directive or influencing end of the spectrum. This helps to ensure that you actually learn enough about the speaker's perspective before seeking to influence them. It also helps to demonstrate your level of care for the listener and helps to build trust, reduce defensiveness, and strengthen the relationship. Pause the video. What listening response do you most commonly use? What response do you use when working with your peers in our class? So now we have 2 sets of dance steps that we can use when communicating in conflict situations. We'll be going over how to deal with criticism and defensiveness either in class or next week. Non-listening. While we can choose from numerous listening responses depending upon the situation, There are other behaviors that are generally never a good idea, particularly in conflict situations. These are classified as different forms of non listening. Non listening occurs when we actually don't really try to interpret and understand the messages being sent by others. It is effectively the opposite of listening. Non listening occurs in various forms. Pseudo listening is an imitation of the listening process. You're not listening, even though you look like you are. Maybe you're even engaging in nonverbal behaviors that give the illusion of paying attention. Stage hogging, as you might guess, involves constantly trying to turn a conversation back towards yourself and your own opinions, ideas, and expectations. So again, you're not actually interested in the other person. Selective listening occurs when you only listen to part of what the speaker is saying. Specifically, you only listen to those parts that are of direct interest to you. So you are listening somewhat, but you're ignoring a significant portion of what the speaker is communicating. Filling in the gaps occurs when you haven't really paid attention during the selecting, understanding, and remembering stages of the listening process. Because of this, when you go to respond, or to recall what the speaker has said, you fabricate information. You make up details that give the impression that you were listening. Insulated listening is similar to selective listening, only in this case you tend to ignore, avoid, or actually fail to hear or acknowledge certain topics. A person who tries to change the topic of a conversation to something more comfortable might actually be practicing insulated listening. Defensive listening occurs when we interpret the statements of a speaker as a personal attack, even when they are not intended as attacks. This speaks to the way perception impacts the listening process. Lastly, ambushing occurs when we do listen carefully, but not for the purposes of understanding the speaker. Rather, we listen only so as to gather information that can be used to attack the speaker. This video provided an overview of different strategies that you can employ in conflict situations. You should be able to define and identify various conflict communication styles, define and identify the various components of an assertive message, describe the listening process, and define and identify various listening and non-listening responses. Sorry about the typo there.